Yellowstone season 1, episode 6, The Remembering is over, but we're just getting started over here at Post Show Recaps. Welcome back, my friends. It is I, Rich Filiberto, DM Philly, out here on the ranch. Very excited to be back with you again, talking about Yellowstone. I, of course, am not alone. I am joined by a woman who stands toe to toe with every bear that chases her down. Grace Leader.
Is it okay if I sit on the bench for a bit? I'm going to go to the bathroom. The podcast starts when I'm ready, right?
Yes.
Okay.
We start whenever you're ready.
Right.
Yes, you know all about it, Grace.
Right.
Take your time.
All right, I'm good. We can start. It's fine.
Episode 6, The Remembering. What'd you think, Grace?
Yeah, I thought it was good. Maybe not as action packed as we've seen. I feel like as we've been watching the show, we've had some pretty intense scenes. Obviously, this is not a great episode for poor Monica, who's going to end up passed out by the end of it. But for the most part, I thought this one felt a little bit mundane. Isn't the right word, but it's much more like talky and it's we're talking to people rather than we're getting into. There is a literal fight between Casey and Rip, but other than that, it's pretty it's more methodical, I think, than some of the other episodes we've had thus far. I still liked it, but it's different. I think
it's true. We don't have the bombastic, explosive, kinetic action that we've gotten in some of the other episodes. The soap opera tunes of Yellowstone were ringing strong for me on this one, as we're really building up the conflict in our main cast and starting to move some of the extraneous people around the actual Dutton family into place for their antagonist arcs going forward. But we will talk it through. I got a little bit of a short, long recap to set us up here. I will dive into it, and then we can talk through the episode proper, as it were. So the episode opens up as Casey is out on the ranch. He finds himself toe to toe with a grizzly bear, much like Brad Pitt in the Legends of the Fall, but he is saved by the man called Rip, who rides up on a horse with no name. The pair of them will engage in fisticuffs, but Casey able to take a punch reasonably well. They part on amicable enough terms. Meanwhile, John Dutton affectionately saying goodbye to Monica and Tate as she needs to take her son to school, lamenting that she has to go, but appreciating that she was willing to stay for the night. Dan Jenkins is making moves on his real estate development firm as Thomas Rainwater is looking to hone in on the action with their consultant being brought in from LA. There's a new strategy being constructed in terms of Jenkins' plan, Rainwater's machinations involved therein. Meanwhile, Beth and Jamie meet with the governor, who takes Beth aside for a small one-to-one sit-down that ends not quite in fisticuffs, though certainly with a great deal of tension and turmoil between the two. While Monica, who arriving at school, ends up in the middle of a fist fight amongst the students, she's going to suffer a hit to the head, which will leave some lingering effects with her as we move towards the end of the episode. Am I missing anything huge here, Grace?
No, I think
that's the gist. That's episode 6. It's the remembering, and I was remembering it. Yeah, I don't know where you want to start with all of it here. I mean, the mandatory bear confrontation scene, I cannot help but always think of Legends of the Fall when we get these scenes, Grace. It feels like a mandatory set piece where we're doing the big Western thing. And Casey handles it pretty well. I do love when we get a grizzly bear in a Western TV show, though.
I just typed in Legends of the Fall and it automatically wanted me to. It says, "Do you want to search Legends of the Fall and Yellowstone?" Which I think is based on my recent activity, but nevertheless, then there's a Reddit thread called "Similarities to Legends of the Fall." So there you go.
It's
Rich.
deeply inspired. Legends of the Fall is very much, it is, I guess, a romantic drama from the 90s at the height of
billed as an epic Western drama.
Well, so there you go. That's a much better description than one that I just gave it. But it's certainly a real Brad Pitt at the height of his power vehicle. I mean, I guess it's more on his trajectory on the way up. I love it. I think it's a really it's a gem of a film that I go back to. But the confrontation with the bear is pretty epic.
Yeah. So one thing, I am watching these episodes, obviously for the first time. I'm typically only watching them once. Obviously there's the confrontation with the bear, and then Rip comes in. He shoots his gun, the bear runs off. And then Rip and Casey just fight. And am I missing the reason that they are fighting other than that? Is this how they're telling us, like, these two guys do not like each other?
Well, Casey's trolling a little bit. Like Rip comes up and saves
Yeah.
Casey's ass from this bear. And Casey's like, "Oh, not used to seeing you off my dad's leash." And Rip's gonna be like, "I'm sorry, excuse me." And Casey's like, "I didn't
I didn't
stutter."
stutter. It's
And
a good
then they
line.
just fight. And it's one of these things. That's what I mean. I say it with affection. Like I really do enjoy Yellowstone, but these soap opera elements are like so real. Like this is such cowboy drama, Grace, of like two men alone in a field. Do they fight or do they not? Of course they fight. And then they both ride off into the separate sunsets on opposite
You know what?
horizons.
The bear was the opening, but it actually wasn't the initial opening. I did love the opening of Casey going. He's trying to, like, he's doing his job. He's trying to break
Yep.
in the stallion that was a little bit wild, and he's doing that. I love the opening of him coming and then riding off. Then we get the intro. Then we get
True.
the bear. It's really beautiful. Like the setting is, it's a beautiful choice to be set in
Oh,
Montana.
yeah. Sheridan knows how to use the space, right? I mean, I think that I talk about it on a lot of the podcasts about shows around here, but I think that it's always better when your setting can manifest itself as a kind of character of its own within the drama, right? And in that way, like Sheridan knows how to really like highlight the beauty of Montana. Those like, I mean, the opening shots in the cold open are so kind of slow and lingering. There was a moment I thought that like the screen was frozen, and I'm
Yes.
like, oh, what's going on? But it's
Yes.
beautiful and it's
Yeah.
pensive. It's not like rushed or harried. And I appreciate it in that way.
I worked at many summer camps, and sometimes you have to get bear training because there are bears. Bears did enjoy the dump that was down the road
Oh,
from
yeah.
our camp, where we would send all the trash, and that was near one of the bike trails that we had on camp. And so, every once in a while you get like, oh, bear sighting. The neighbors would call, no bike ride down that path of the thing. So we would get bear training for our staff of what to do. And one of the camps I worked at, which is an outdoor education center, I worked in the spring and the fall. There was an ongoing joke, like sort of a meme, that whenever certain people would see each other, you'd often greet each other with "Hey bear, whoa bear," because that is what we were told to.
Oh, yeah.
Exactly what Casey is doing. Make yourself as big as possible. And it's funny because I feel like somebody has a very famous stand-up bit about the idea of like one of them is like you run and one of them is you stay, and it's very bad to get them mixed up into like a black bear and a brown bear. Like if it's
Yes.
yeah, I can't, and honestly, I can't remember at the moment what it is, but there's
I
one that you
think
yeah.
this is probably the wrong advice, but I think that you don't run from the grizzly bears because grizzly bears are more like predatory than black bears. The black bears are the ones that you can like scare off. The black bears there's more black bear attacks, at least in North America, because their crossover with human, like places is more common, and they're typically defending their cub. But a
Also, I
grizzly
said
bear
you
is the one
run.
that'll run you down and eat you. Yeah.
I said you run, but apparently I don't think you should run at all. Apparently the rhyme is if it's brown, lay down. If it's black,
Yes.
fight back.
You
If
tuck
it's
yourself
white,
up in a ball and like protect your soft parts and your
yeah.
face. Yeah.
But we were trying, so it must have been whatever it must have been black. Yeah, but there's more black bears where
Yes.
I would be, which is like, north-ish Ontario, not super north, but northern Ontario. And so the trainer, I was, just give it hi and say, "Hey bear, whoa bear." And so that became like a very common greeting at one of my camps, where every time you see me go, "Hey bear, whoa bear," is like one of the greetings, and you'd make yourself look really big. So yeah, it seemed like Casey was doing. Well, no, because was it a brown bear? It wasn't
That's
a black bear.
definitely a brown bear. Yes, that
So
was a
he should have been
grizzly.
lying
Yep.
down. He should not
Yes.
have been.
No, Casey
Okay.
got bad advice.
Casey, bad. But then Rip just comes and they punch each other in the face. so silly, very silly, but whatever, it's fine.
Yeah, the two of them are funny. I mean, I think you're tracking it correctly. Clearly, these guys don't get along real well. And
Yeah.
especially, I think, on the heels of the episode that we just watched with the branding, like knowing both these guys are branded men and that they're like kind of like tied into the crew in this way. Like, I don't know, they're as close as you get to John Dutton, right? I think that especially with like the absence of Casey's older brother, we exist in this space where, these two guys are in certain ways the heirs apparent. And I think that it plays interestingly, especially with what John's going to say to Beth later on, which is like, you're the only one in this family strong enough to take this advice. You need a man up, right?
Yeah.
The idea that like he only trusts both of them really so far, Grace. Yeah.
Yes, I agree. Talk about John. I do think that my favorite dynamic on the show is definitely John and Monica, and
Yep.
to a degree that also extends to Casey. And you know, I'm a fan of Tate, even if you're not. He's gonna figure out which donut is the biggest. I do really love John and Monica because I do think that this is a relationship that is trying to be built on such rocky foundation. And John's going to come clean with a bunch of this stuff about, you know, why Casey basically, you know, why he got branded, why he got pushed too far. This was because he got Monica pregnant, was basically why John basically branded his own son. And he also reveals that he's like, oh, that's why you had him branded. It's like, no, that one was me. And again, it's my favorite part of the show is the complexity of John Dutton, who is this sweet grandfather who's like, boy, you can you can do whatever you want here. You know, he's like full, you know, kind of annoying, probably grandfather. Like, I know this is true where it's like, as an aunt, like sometimes I'll be like, you know, these my nieces will ask their parents, like, can I have Smarties? And they're like, no. And then I like go and sneak them and let them have the Smarties, you know, right? It's like that's what you're supposed to do. And the annoying, you know, this annoying grandparent of like, he's gonna eat like 7 donuts before he goes to school, you know, but he's
Mhm.
like, you can do whatever you want when you're at grandpa's house. With this complexity of like, yeah, I branded my own son because you know, and I actually did love the further explanation of the branding, and then it's not that everybody gets the branding. This is like your second chance. This is like
Mhm.
you've you know, this is your other shot, and you need to like kind of owe everything to Yellowstone. He doesn't say that, but that's my interpretation. That like, you know, you wouldn't be around if it wasn't for Yellowstone. So you need to like look at the branding, and we're gonna put that on you. Just the complexity of John Dutton and Monica, who I find like very endearing, very sweet. When she's like handed a cup of coffee, she's like, "Yeah, I'm a teacher. I live on coffee." I just really love. This is where I think like there's the most juice in the show for me so far.
Yeah, I think that you're on point. I think that the two of them have such a great relationship. But you know, so many of the interactions between John and the kids are really straightforward. Even if there's like complexity there, they're the kind of relationships we've interrogated before that are like toxic and broken and damaged. And John has to like manage his presentation to them in a way that he does not with Monica, right? I think
Mhm.
he sees in this woman somebody that he really badly wants to accept him into her life. And in the, you know, in the midst of this episode, we hear Dan Jenkins talking about John controls everything in this county. He's involved in all the politicians. Everything goes through him. Like, this man has so much power, but at the same time, he has no power over Monica, really, right? Because Casey has already like shown that he's willing to turn his back on his family for her, for his commitment to her, to his family. So John has got nothing really, he's got nothing to lose in a sense, but he's just really authentic in a way that I don't think he is with anyone else in his life. He's
Mhm.
able to be himself because he's like, anything else I do here, she's going to see through my bullshit. I can't posture. I can't use like my political clout. I can't use my role as the patriarch of the family to like muscle her into what I want her to do. I have to really get through to her. And these two people are both like strong, fierce, stubborn people, right?
Mhm.
That I think that have like a lot of shared commonalities in their like makeup, if not in their actual personalities, right? So
Mhm.
I'm with you. I think it's a really, really compelling dynamic between the two of them. And to the Tate of it all, I think it's like really interesting when he's kind of talking about to Monica, like, my son went and got this girl pregnant, and I told him to like get an abortion, but he did what he was going to do. Like, he did what he wanted to do. He didn't listen to me. And then on the heels of that, we get the scene with him and Tate. And he's saying, you could do whatever you want, right? And the
Right.
way that like spoil and entitlement and like that kind of like free reign can create this kind of a beast in you, you
Uh-huh.
know, in your kid. I found it really interesting.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. I hadn't thought about that. This idea of like this kid that wouldn't exist if John got his way, and the fact that Casey doesn't take Monica to get an abortion. And then it's like this thing that seemingly John loves more than anything else in the world. It's like the thing
Yeah.
that he's trying. We talked about this. We watched a show recently. The episode should be out. We watched an episode of Tales from the Loop that's just like, yeah, hits you over the head. It's about like the end of a grandfather's life, and he's trying to repair his not repair his relationship, but he's developing a relationship with his grandson because he was like not being a good father. And I feel like there's so much of that in this
Yep.
episode, in the show, about John being this really ruthless man. He had a man killed 2 episodes ago. Yeah, he's a ruthless individual, a rugged man who runs a pretty corrupt, thing he has going on, and yet he also can be this very sweet grandfather. I just love the complexity. Yeah, and that idea of like, yeah, you can do anything you want. And even think about how that relates to like Casey does whatever he wants,
Yeah.
until he does it, until John doesn't want him to do it, and then it's like, push comes to shove. Yeah.
It's really interesting to me. To the other Dutton kids here, we got the like Jamie and Beth dynamic duo. These two together, Grace, they like consistently entertain me. I'll say that much. As they're going to this meeting with the governor, and Beth has to like stall, like, "Oh, I just need to use the bathroom real quick." Like, she's just making him berserk, right? And so they go have this meeting with Governor Linnell. Like, how are you feeling about all of these dynamics?
I mean, the sibling dynamic is so fun. I mean, I have 3 brothers, so, growing up, there's a lot of this, like, you figure out how to push your siblings' buttons, in a way that like nobody else can do, and you hate them more than anybody else in the world, and yet you also like, yeah, you love them, right? This is what Jamie says to Beth plus episode, like, if you need someone to hate to live, like hate, pick
Mhm.
me, and so she's like, yeah, just needling him so hard. That is all to me very relatable. The way that like you might notice it in my humor on podcasts, and I'm very like, I like picking up on things that people say and then manipulating those words in a way that I think is funny. Sometimes people don't always love that. One person who does not love that is when my brother and I are both around my mother, like because we both do the same thing of like, she'll like say something kind of wrong, and we're both like, oh, joke, 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 and she gets so annoyed. So this family dynamic is very funny. The politics thing, I want to be more into it. I thought when we were going there, I was pretty intrigued by it, and then it feels like we stalled out on it for so long, that now that we're here, and I think for me, it's the fact that they're both doing it is the thing that I don't know. I, I don't know. We'll see how it plays out, but I'm like, it's both of these scenes are interesting in terms of like Linnell talking with Beth, and Beth basically trying to put Linnell in her place, revealing that she like knows that she's been sleeping with, because she sees her come out the day that she's in the bathtub, right? The day of her, and then she confronts her father, like, why today? And he's like, this is the day I most need to forget, right? The day of
Yep.
his
Yes.
wife's death. So that's how she knows. There's something there to it. Again, I feel like this stuff has not quite hooked me in a way that I really wanted to. I think part of it is that I can understand that they want to do this for influence and power, and obviously both things are now relating back to John, in the sense that Beth's conversation is her threatening Linnell about sleeping with her father. Jamie's is learning that John had cancer, but I feel like I need a little bit more about what specifically they want to do with the power of getting into these positions. And it feels like, yeah, on one hand that could feel really obvious, like it's power and it protects the Yellowstone and protects John Dutton. On the other hand, I want to be almost more in the weeds than we are. I don't know if that makes
I
sense.
totally get it. Yeah, no, like the ingredients are there, but they're just not like coming together in the right way. They haven't been prepared properly for you.
Mhm.
Like, I'm with you there because I'm one of these people that loves a good political like element in my TV shows, right? Battlestar Galactica is probably like my elite sci-fi series. Like, I'm always arguing about put the politics back in Star Wars, Grace.
Mhm.
So I like love this stuff, but ultimately what like compels me most about this whole political storyline, it's the interpersonal drama. And it's like very much just this like perpetual tension yet loyalty between Jamie and Beth, and the way that like Beth is just such like a troublemaker and like kind of an agent of chaos, right? Like she's pushing every button that she can see everywhere she goes. Like Governor Linnell really like I think kind of reads her for filth. There's a little bit of this moment of like, oh yeah, a child has a trauma, they're frozen. Like I see this teenage girl, and there is like, oh gosh, yeah, especially with like what we've seen of Beth's story story so far. Like, it feels like one of these Sherlock Holmes moments, Grace, of like Governor Linnell just like nails her, but she just won't have it. She's such like a kind of a force, whether it's true or whether it's not, is meaningless because Beth's like gonna still punch back. Like, she, like her brother Casey, can definitely like take a shot to the jaw and like keep coming, man. She does not care as she like unloads. So it's just kind of like the relationship drama that comes out of the political storyline is the best stuff that I feel like we're getting out of that front right now.
Yeah, that's fair. I just wish maybe there was more conflict inherent to it other than like I don't really care that much about Linnell. So
Mhm.
the conflict between Beth and Linnell doesn't really do much for me. There is some conflict between Beth or Jamie, but I was kind of excited by the notion, and it might still come in the sense that if John has to wield sort of political influence, time and money into two campaigns, does one get the better of him? And it does seem, or the more of his attention, and it does seem like Beth's is one that he would want to make sure happens more than Jamie's, yet Jamie is the one who is more interested in actually being in politics. So there's something there that that we haven't really explored. The stuff about Jamie running as like an independent is kind of interesting. This feels like them putting some political commentary in, being like, independents are the ones who make decisions. And I actually do think there's an essence to this that's true. I was not just about American politics, thinking Canadian politics too. This idea that in systems that are mostly two-party, Canada is not a two-party system, but we're pretty friggin' close to it. We basically have three parties plus a party that's in Quebec. But this idea that like the more you're in the party system, the more entrenched into that side you have to be, and you have to
Yep.
be there. Whereas it's like, we see it a lot, where like very annoyingly in the United States government that like, Joe Manchin and Kristen Sinema, who I think has since become an independent, could like control what was happening to the
Yep.
government because they're like the two Democrats who would be like, no, we're moderate in quotations, and we're going to hold up all this stuff that we don't agree with. It's because they sit close to the center that they're able to do that. Like, I do think there's something like interesting in terms of the commentary about like run as an independent Jamie, where he's like a bit hesitant to that, and then the response to it. I do think that was interesting, social commentary, political commentary of the modern day.
Yeah, I think that it assuredly is. I mean, this episode airs in like 2018. The political discourse that's happening in the nation at that time
Mm,
is pretty charged. I don't know. There's a lot to be said about the failures of the binary two-party system. It like incites a lot of trouble. But the other big reveal here, right, is the kids just finding out about the cancer and them
yeah.
coming back to John. And then I love him like, oh, it's nice to see some real human emotion from the pair of you. Thanks for that, right? As
Mm,
they seem to be like confronting him about like the fallout politically of the situation and all of it. And this is where he's going to like pull Beth aside and be like, you need to toughen up. They get into it about the governor a little bit. And he's like, what's the problem? She's not mom. That's the problem. And he's like, yeah, never mention her again or go back to Utah. Like, I don't want to have any of this. Like, just to like close the thread on kind of the two of them this week. Like, how's that working for you? The dynamics with the two of them and dad.
Um, yeah, I mean, this is where I think there's the most interest, right? This is the
Yep.
most, I have I said this on Yellowstone podcast? We're doing a lot of podcasting together, Rich. So
We are.
sometimes I
We
forget
record a lot. Yeah.
where I say certain things, but kind of like, I'm gonna make a reference to Rome, even though this is not the Rome podcast, which is all roads lead to John Dutton for me. In terms
Yes.
of this is the guy who the show is advertised on, and I do think he's the best actor on the show. And so I think the storylines are most compelling for me when they intertwine back into John and John being this like father figure of the family who is again this very complex man. So yeah, I think he says to her like she forfeited the right to mention her mother ever again is something he says to her. Like this is I do like this. I like this part of Beth. This idea that there's something that John sees in her. He is such a complicated man. She is a very complicated woman, and his daughter, and the fact that he sees the like seemingly the most potential in her over anybody else to me is intriguing. I like where that slots Jamie in, who is this very, we've seen him in cowboy attire, but he's often, slicked back hair and he's in the
Mhm.
suits. He seems like, in a show that has Casey, in a way, he would seem like he should be the biggest outsider, and he's not really, but also it's like this dynamic of like, he's like, I figured it all out, and yet my dad doesn't respect me.
Yep.
He's looking to Beth. I think that's interesting as well. So I do think that there's interesting stuff here. It just is more interesting when it's like, talked about the, all the ingredients, but the outcome, whatever you baked, isn't very good. I do think, like, to keep on the food metaphor, like, it's most interesting when you put all the stuff in one bowl, and it's like it's like the central
Mhm.
story of this ranch family and how they all interact. That's where I get the most intrigued by the show.
I feel you. Yeah, I want a nice, like, cheesy Dutton casserole where they're
Yeah,
all, like,
yeah.
melting in over each other. I think that's where it works best. The thing for me is, again, this element of, like, where John needs obedience from these kids. He needs them to, like, follow his orders. He needs them to, like, believe in what he's saying and kind of, like, do what he wants them to do, go where he wants them to go. But yet seemingly he's got, like, the most respect for Beth, kind of, who is, like, the least pliable of all of them in a certain way, right? Of like the three remaining children. So I just think it's a dynamic for us to, like, keep our eyes on as we go. I do really love, like, Kelly Riley with Costner. I think she's a great scene partner for him and can, like, hold her own in a way that's kind of interesting. But
Hmm.
uh, to the other side of all of this, not quite political, but rather commercial, as we're dealing with, like, the Dan Jenkins, Thomas Rainwater potential alliance that's happening here, right? Jenkins is, like, bringing in this headhunter from, like, California to help him orient his strategy of how he's going to be able to, like, manage to maneuver around Dutton. But Rainwater's, like, got his own agenda, which, like, seems to be that he wants to buy all the property. Grace, like, how's this half of, like, the moving and the shaking beyond the Duttons working?
Yeah, so I talked about how in episode 1, this, like, basically episode that's like a feature length film, I thought it was really interesting how you have all, like, the Dutton family is, all of these cast of characters, but then you have these external forces, like, pressing in against specifically John. And I do like that we took a little bit of a break from, they're not like they're not in these episodes, but slowly, reassembling, the world's worst Avengers team, gathering together, to try to take down John Dutton, what I assume is like the ramp for potentially a season finale. So I liked it. I mean, I love Gil Birmingham, and Laird, who's not Laird, Danny Houston.
Yeah, they really are very fun. Like,
Yeah.
both these guys are awesome actors that I'm always delighted to see pop up in a show. So to have both of them together is kind of fun.
Yeah, so I do get this idea that Thomas is he's going to buy the land even though the river has been diverted. This, like, advisor's trying to be like, hey, they'll be worthless. Like, there's no point because there's going to be like the river, what was going to power the source, and now you don't have access to the river because the Duns diverted it. Thomas wants to buy it anyway, and then he's going to offer, and then this idea that, like, they need the way to, like, cut down John Dunn is to get somebody in the livestock commissioner's position, and so they can do that. And also at the same time, Thomas is he's going to loan, he's going to give a power source, right, he's going to give a power source to Dan and his subdivision is what
Yeah,
he's
that's the
offering.
idea, right? That, like, he's going to utilize, like, his connections as, like, the head of this Native American tribe to be able to, like, get access to funding and, like, loan money that it would otherwise be, like, really hard to get their hands on, right?
And is the idea that it's, like, not going to be a subdivision? It's actually going to be like they're going to build a casino instead. Is this what or there also will be a subdivision there? Am I
Well, I think
understanding correctly?
no, I think you kind of are, but we also, like, didn't get deep into it yet, right? Like, Rainwater
Okay.
isn't revealing his whole maneuver yet, I don't think, right?
Got it. Got it.
Yeah, I found them really, like, interesting, right? I think that this is, like, building to a fascinating place. I have to, like,
Mhm.
check myself to, like, really keep the commentary to within the episodes as we're getting them, which is why, like, I'm a little hesitant on, like, wait, what? Like,
Well,
what
it
did
is for
exactly get
it.
said here, right? Yeah.
This is this is the level of, like, to me, this stuff is more interesting to me than, like, generically Jamie and Beth trying to run for power, because, like, run for office, because I'm understanding the motivation more than, like, to gain more power, which is like what it's like, and to protect the family interest. I don't understand exactly how them doing it, like, specifically. I want them to get into the details, and maybe that's not this show, except that here there is, like, this, like, this would be very boring if it wasn't for the fact that like they're trying to take down this man who we know they both kind of hate, right?
Yeah.
And so that's why it's interesting, even if the minutia seems boring to most people. I'm like, no, tell me how building a casino and buying the land that like where the river got diverted, like
Yes.
fun. How are we gonna? Yeah, like what an interesting way to try to take down John Dutton. You know, this is like how Al Capone was taken down on tax fraud. You know, I'm like,
Yup. Yup.
okay, fun, you know, for me. So I do like the like assembling of the supervillain team to a degree.
Me too. I think the devil's in the details, right? And I love this kind of like the small maneuvers, right? The things that like a John Dutton isn't necessarily going to be able to keep his eyes on. Like part of the issue with somebody that accumulates this much power is like the perpetual effort that it takes to be able to hold on to this much power, Grace, right? Like it's
Yeah.
a lot of work and there's all kinds of like chinks in the armor. I also really love Thomas Rainwater walking into that office and Dan Jenkins being like, aren't you going to introduce yourself to me? And he's like, yeah, what for? Like, you're not the one calling the shots. Like the interplay between the two of them, these guys with like these gigantic egos going up against a guy with an even bigger ego than both of them put together is very, very fun. I didn't talk about it because it's such like a small footnote of the episode in our little recap, Grace, but Sarah Nguyen, we have these two ladies on their vacation on the river. She's reading the newspaper. They're going to come boating by while John Dutton is out fly fishing. Like, I don't know. Did this work for you at all? How's this? What's going on there?
I don't know what's happening at all. It felt very tense, but then I don't know what this is supposed to represent. So, sure.
Yeah,
Fine.
that's kind of why I didn't mention it because there's like no real context here. We kind of don't know what's going on. It felt very weird to me. Like I've watched the show now. I think this is my third rewatch. I've watched Yellowstone a bunch of times, you guys. And like going back through it, this is the first time where it really struck me where I'm like, I think this doesn't belong in this episode. Like it's just like so kind of inserted. And it will go somewhere. We'll like see where it's going later on. But I just wanted to check in with you and see like how you received this at all.
No, it's very, as someone who watches a lot of TV, I'm very glad that you raised it. And then when I said like, yeah, I don't understand it, that you weren't like, you fool, you were supposed to know that she's you know, the
No.
third, whatever, that there's no reason, because I feel like I watch a lot of TV and when I get confused, I'm like, I often say this, that I need TV. Sometimes I need TV shows to think, most of the time, I'm like, you should actually presume that I'm dumber than I actually am. Just presume, because if
Yes.
I'm watching TV, just presume. Like, I don't get, in real life, nobody's like walking around all the time when they enter a door and they'll be like, hello, Rich. It's like, you
Yes.
say, hey, what's up? But like, I need the TV audience to know that your name is Rich. So you're gonna say, hey, Rich. You'd be like, hey, Grace, what's up? That's how it works on TV. That's like, so I didn't understand this at all. And then I feel like, am I missing something? And I'm sure, as I watch the next episode, I'm sure it will all be clarified, but no, it's kind of, it's very strange.
It's very jarring. Yeah.
Yeah.
I too watch a lot of TV and I always, when I come to these moments that I have like a head scratcher, I have to say to myself, like, do I watch too much TV? Is that the problem, that like I've got too much rattling around in there? And that's why I can't just like see this moment for whatever it is or whatever it's intended to be. But no, I do think this is a little bit jarring, right? I think they're trying to like create some interest of like, it's a setup for a thing so that later we could be like, oh yeah, we remember them. But I do think it was deployed inelegantly here and it's a bit ineffective. It just feels like jarring. And I think it's supposed to be jarring as they come by on the boat and that guy says to John, like, man, she really had something for you. It's like, yep, I guess that was a really intense stare. It's like your boat floated sideways down the river. Also, that's a great fishing decorum from John Dutton. I just got to say it. This is like highly polite to take your lines up out of the water for the boaters that are coming by. Really thoughtful.
I don't fish. So yeah, the best I know is that at our cottage that we have, my niece was up for the first time, spending a couple days there, and we were walking down to the marina to buy candy, as one is to do. And I said, make sure you wave. You have to wave. It's cottage country rules that you wave to everybody as they drive by. And she was so shy and she wouldn't do it until eventually she did. She learned the cottage rules, which is you wave every time. Hello.
Oh,
yeah.
I thought that story was going in a very different direction where you bought her Swedish fish, and then we talked about how they're
I don't
actually endemic population in Canada or
Yeah, I
something.
don't think they had. I don't think. I mean, we do have Swedish fish, but I don't think we bought. I don't really like Swedish fish, but
I'm a kind of huge fan of Swedish fish, a guilty pleasure, dare I admit it. I am a huge fisherman. I like got my first hat when I was 10 years old of like, women love me, fish fear me. And then I grew out of that pretty quick, but I do love my fishing. I'm not like an excellent fly fisher. So I'm always like taken watching dudes fly fishing in rivers. A
Mhm.
River Runs Through It, another great 90s film with Brad Pitt in it, where he
There
doesn't
you go.
fight any bears. Um, yeah, I don't know about that whole scene. We'll see. We'll talk more about Sarah later. Like, I definitely had to like do a little bit of backwards Googling to be like, do we even get those people's names? Do we know anything about them at all? Let's circle back. Let's talk about Monica a little bit. As like,
Mhm.
I know we discussed like her and John and their kind of conversation at the beginning.
Yep.
So like, this was another beat of like, Monica's going to go to school. The kids are fighting. She's trying to like break up the fight. She gets punched in the head. Things feel bad for Monica by the end of this, Grace. Like, how do we feel about like Monica under attack?
This felt very soap opera to me. This felt way more soap opera than even the fight at the beginning, which is
Well,
like
that's because that's like cowboy soap opera. We don't consider them soap operas. We just call them westerns.
right, right. Yeah, West. Yes, that's right. This one is like it doesn't really have anything to do with anything
Nope.
else. Like
Nope.
nothing. We're gonna get this whole beat with the drone where the drone is spying on the bones. I forget where we left with this. That like they are dinosaur bones, or is it the idea that they're not dinosaur? But they are
I think
dinosaur bones,
they're
aren't they?
dinosaur bones. I think
You
they're
can't maybe you can't
dinosaur.
say more. Yeah, but there's this drone, and then they throw the rock at it, and they shoot it, and then he chases the car, and the car drives off. Like, yeah, that's like this is better than the woman in the boat scene. At least it's like okay, I can see where like you're setting something up for a future episode. But then Casey comes back, and as he comes out, Monica falls over and passes out. Yeah, it's just I don't want anything bad to happen to Monica. I don't
No.
like that this happened. That scene of like Tate finding his mom and she's like bleeding on the ground. I thought was like pretty intense and sad. So I don't know. This worked for me more than some things this episode. So it's got that going for it. But yeah, it feels very soap opera of like how do we inject drama into this thing? It's like, yeah, she gets punched. She does get punched pretty hard by that kid.
I
Yeah.
know it's really brutal. I
Uh-huh.
know that I've been like not super affectionate towards Tate, but I do feel bad for him here. I don't want any kid to have to like find their mom in that kind
Yeah.
of state.
Yeah.
I think the kid's an idiot. He shouldn't have fallen into that river. That's not
Yeah.
my problem.
Yeah.
But this is like if we're keeping track of just Casey and Monica's like situation since episode 1. Casey killed Monica's brother and then was like almost arrested for it. Then he murdered a bunch of like meth dealers. Then there was like a child abduction that he's
Mm-hmm.
gotten drawn into.
Mm-hmm.
Now
Mm-hmm.
he's getting like run down by bears out of the farm
He
and
does get
brawling.
arrested. He does, and then he
Yeah.
gets out of it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's an
Mm-hmm.
arrest. There's like a near arrest. We have to kill an actual coroner, right? Lest we
Mm-hmm.
forget. I mean, that's like peripheral. It's not directly involving Casey, but it's part of like the Casey and Monica soap opera plights. It's episode 1. Rip's gonna blow up the whole like, medicine officer there. Oh, I guess that was for the brother. That's my bad.
Okay, but but the Rip does leave a medical file, like an autopsy report, but I believe it is for Monica's brother, not for what is the oldest Dutton's name?
I never
R.I.P.
remember, Grace.
Luke or
Once we're in
something,
episode
whatever.
2, I stopped paying attention to his name. He doesn't matter. He's the dead Dutton.
Jimmy John Dutton, I think, because the autopsy report was the fact that when he got shot, he would be paralyzed. Therefore, he could have never shot Monica's
Yes.
brother.
Yes.
So, but having Rip dropping off Monica's brother's autopsy report, I don't believe we've been shown any bit of evidence to know why that is somewhat of a smoking gun, other than like, hey, I know you did this, but I feel like everybody basically knows he did. Like, even I feel like Gil basically like knows. I don't know, I don't know.
Kind of everybody knows. I
Gil, I
just
mean
think, like,
Thomas.
specifically, it's really fun to track the absolute insane things that continue to happen to Casey and Monica as we go forward. Like, this is a thing,
Yeah.
and like the idea of like literally just taking the kid to school ends up with like her in the hospital. She's fainting at the house. There's like drone spying. I do really appreciate that we saw the tractors still laying there sideways behind the trailer. Like, things have been so frantic as I would try to describe there quite
Yeah.
poorly, but nonetheless, that they haven't even had time to put the tractor back on four wheels. It's just like nonstop drama for Casey and the fam, Grace. That's
Yeah.
the deal. Yeah.
They're my favorite. I love it. It's more entertaining to me than like Beth and Jamie. So I'll take it. I'll take the
I
wacky world of Casey and Monica any day.
spin-off series coming soon. I
I
wouldn't be
mean, they're doing a
surprised.
lot of Yellowstone does a lot of spin-off
I
series. Don't
know.
joke. Don't
I,
joke. Yeah.
I want to see Casey and Monica go to Tulsa, Oklahoma and meet Sylvester Stallone. Give me that, Taylor Sheridan. Tell your dad, Grace.
Isn't there a new one that they're doing isn't Bass Reeves? There's a new one coming.
I
Lawman?
know we got McConaughey coming, right? Like amidst, we haven't really talked about like the Yellowstone meta text a whole bunch, but they are currently like embroiled. Kevin Costner was like recently in court. There's lawsuits happening. They want to get him back. Costner is going back to his halcyon days of the 90s where he spends a ton of money to make movies like Waterworld and The Postman, two of my unironic like favorite movies, Grace. So he's doing this like gigantic multi-part epic film series that I believe he has like mortgaged his house and like sold an incredible amount of property to finance appropriately, which led to him telling Taylor Sheridan that he won't be returning to like finish the second half of this like final and current season of Yellowstone. So that has led to like some kind of preemptive kind of like termination notices. I think we're like basically done with Yellowstone at this point, but we're going to get a spin-off with McConaughey, and I love Matthew McConaughey ever since the days of Dazed and Confused. So that's kind of some of the Yellowstone like meta text as it stands in reality right now.
What McConaughey? Because I mean, Taylor Sheridan's like television producing since like 2018 is wild. He had Yellowstone. He has The Last Cowboy, which is I don't know what The Last Cowboy is. Mayor of Kingstown, which is the Jeremy Renner one. 1883, Tulsa King, 1923, Special Ops Lioness, and then Lawman Bass Reeves is coming, and then apparently there's a show called Landman that's coming at some point too. So this guy is just he's got a lot of stuff happening. Yep.
He's popping off. The powers that be in Hollywood, they love themselves a Taylor Sheridan, right? I mean, it's clear like Paramount's made some like big deals with the guy. Yellowstone became like a major juggernaut in an era where like the network television shows like have died, and it's rare to like get the kind of numbers that Yellowstone appeared to have been getting as it was pulling in towards the beginning of season 5 there. So the whole debacle with Costner like not coming back and then not being able to finish the season, it's a real interesting like kind of wrinkle amidst like a very curious landscape of like television production nowadays, Grace. But I thought it's interesting. I'm certainly optimistic for anything with McConaughey in it. I think of that list of things that you just like kicked off, I would recommend 1883. I do think it's like authentically just a good standalone kind of show, and it sets up Yellowstone really well. Like if you want like the Yellowstone like prehistory of like the founding of this ranch, it's a pretty awesome story. And I dug it. 1923 was fun, but it just did not like reach the heights of 1883.
This Lawman Bass Reeves, I think we're looking to maybe there might be some coverage here on post show recaps for it. It looks interesting. It's based off Bass Reeves, who is the first black deputy U.S. Marshal west of the Mississippi River, a former enslaved a man who becomes a U.S. Marshal. Looks pretty interesting. Got Dennis Quaid in there. David Owyhee, is going to be the lead of the show. It looks kind of fun. It's set in the Yellowstone universe, apparently. So
I've heard Tarantino talk a lot about Bass Reeves in relation to Django specifically, and Bass Reeves was like a really notable and prominent icon that got referenced on Damon Lindelof's Watchmen, which was really interesting. I mean, Lindelof did some really dynamic stuff with that show, and that was like really where Bass Reeves like came to my attention for the first time. So I'd be curious. I'll check it out. That's the thing, you know, I don't love everything that Taylor Sheridan makes equally, but like sometimes the guy does really great stuff. Like he really he can like evoke some awesome characters in these dramas that he creates. But that's pretty much episode 6 of Yellowstone, Grace. Is there anything that like we didn't go over that you want to?
No, I should just say you're listening to this as it comes out a little bit later in the week. I think that not Paramount, CBS is playing a little bit funky with their TV schedule. We'll do our best to make sure that moving forward, we like got everything in line. Our next episode, we're going to recap both 7 and 8 because those both are dropping on Sunday, October 15th. So we'll have a recap of both those episodes in the same podcast. And then it looks like the finale will drop the week after, and it doesn't look like there's any information about how they're doing season 2. So Yeah, we'll do our best to let you know at the end of each episode if like next week's a double episode, because it looks like they're going to maybe try to do that to potentially expedite, trying to get 5 seasons of TV on Sunday nights. So we'll let you know at the end of each episode what it looks like we're going to be covering the week after, and we'll do our best to make sure we're in line with what airs on CBS on Sunday nights.
Excellent. Thank you for that. Grace, we will be back next week, like you
Yeah.
said, talking about both episodes that are going to be dropping on the 15th. But until then, what are you up to? Where can people find you?
Yeah, so I'm doing a lot right now. Jess and I have launched a new show called Full Spoiler Recaps. By the time you're listening to this, we've released an episode on The Continental from the world of John Wick. Next week, we'll be doing The Fall of the House of Usher, the new Mike Flanagan Netflix show. Movies each week with Ariel. Ariel and I are also talking about The Morning Show. We're also talking, you and I, Rich, with Ariel about Tales from the Loop, and you and I are doing Rome. Our flag means death drop. So I got a lot going on here in Post Show Recaps. I'm on Twitter at Hi From Grace or at Go For Grace.
Cool. I'm at DM Philly out there on the socials. You can hit me up there. Twitch.tv/DM Philly, on YouTube of the same name for all the TTRPG stuff. Ahsoka is wrapped. The Wheel of Time season 2 is wrapped. I got a little bit of a tail on that comment. We're doing a couple of wrap-up shows after season 2 book club podcast coming out. All the aforementioned stuff with Grace. I'm talking about the Winter King on the weekends with Prez. So and Dimension 20 coverage of the new show over there, Burroughs End, with myself and the great Dr. Melissa Woodward. That was very, very fun. You should go check it out if you dig any of the role-playing game nonsense. We will be back next week, but until then, Grace, keep your eye out for those